Hello, today's July 24th of 2026, and today I'm going to be reviewing about 6 different documents that have been posted in the Federal Register covering environmental review, energy infrastructure, fisheries recovery, and the Colorado River governance. The Federal Register is an official daily publication of the United States federal government. It is where the federal agencies and president formally publish rules, proposed rules, notices, and presidential documents such as executive orders and proclamations. Today I'll introduce a series of notices on environmental review, energy infrastructure, fisheries recovery, and the governance of the Colorado River. I want to hear your feedback, thoughts, questions, and viewpoints, so if you like, leave a comment below. Push the like button, subscribe if you want to keep up on the Federal Register, knowing what the executive branch is doing. Each week I review selected items. I can't do them all. There's hundreds and hundreds of them, but I do try to get ones that rank relatively prominently. I mean, there's tons of notices on there about just trivial things that nobody cares about, and then there are other things that are just basically confirming meetings that were posted before, and all sorts of it's everything gets posted there. So if you ever look at it, you'll find that every agency, all the president's actions, they're all on there. But each week I try to pick some, and then I cover them so that everyone gets a no BS literal interpretation of what they're doing and what other government officials have said about it. My name is Dr. Malcolm McCallum. I hold a PhD in environmental sciences and have over 30 years experience teaching in higher education, specifically in environmental sciences. I have taught law students, medical students, dental students, agriculture students, in all those different majors, in math and in chemistry, and in biology, in the departments of agriculture. I've got a very wide background. So as an environmental scientist, which is what I am, my role is to research, educate, and inform about how the world of humans and the world of nature interact. This umbrella where they do interact is called the socio-ecological world, and that's where people live. They have a social system and an ecological system, and those two things interact, and humans are dependent on both. The overarching purpose of the field of environmental sciences is to protect everyday people and the natural world from the rich and powerful. So I believe just by explaining what news items appear in the Federal Register, I'll be informing everyday people and basically anybody who listens to this about what the government is really doing, if they are working for you or somebody else. So let's look at a few of these. These were also published on July 6th of 2026 in the Federal Register, and there are 6 of these. The first one is the Tennessee Gas Pipeline notice of scoping period, and it's requesting comments. Scoping is something they do in the environmental impact assessment process, and so they're scoping to find out what kind of information might be out there before they go into the full process of environmental impact assessment. This is being issued by the Federal Regulatory Commission of the Department of Energy, and you can look that up on the Federal Register. It is 91 FR 45803-45805 in the Federal Register. If you type that in, you should find it. The numbers represent the page numbers in the Federal Register, and the 91 represents the volume that it is, and FR stands for Federal Register. The comment period is going to extend from August 17th of 2026 at 5 p.m. That's when it's going to be due. So if you want to comment on this, you want to get going, you can actually call or email the Office of Public Participation for the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and the phone number is 202-502-6595, and the email address is opp@ferc.gov. there's also a FERC online support number, 866-208-3676, and an email address associated with that. I'm not sure how those online support contact information work, but I do know that the other number and email is the one that you contact to literally give the information. The second notice is an order adopting categorical exclusions from the Tennessee Valley Authority under the National Environmental Policy Act. This is also issued by the Department of Energy, and it's 91 FR 45806. And of course, it has an associated, I think the number's the same. Let me double check. Yeah, you call the same people as in the one before. Then we have a document on the Magnuson-Stevens Act. I'm not sure if it's Magnuson or Magnuson. It's Magnuson. But it's the Magnuson-Stevens Act provisions. This is on Pacific Coast groundfish recovery. It's Amendment 38, 2027-28. And it's biennial specifications and management measures. So that's kind of what the title is. This is being issued by NOAA, the National Marine Fisheries Service of NOAA, and it's Federal Register document 91 FR 45764-45765 should you want to read the complete document. This one here, comments are due on September 19th of 2026, and you should contact Megan Roberts at 206-526-4048. That's his phone number, or her phone number, or you can email at Megan, MEGHAN .Roberts, ROBERTS at NOAA.gov, and this is docket NOAA-NMFS-2026-1354. I think you need that when you comment. The fourth document is DISIC Technologies Inc. Environmental Assessment and Finding of No Significant Impact. A finding of FONS. This is also referred to as a FONSI. The acronym is FONSI. These are issued when something basically just doesn't have a significant impact. This is being issued by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and it's Federal Register number 91 FR 45840-45842. The environmental assessment and FONSI available July 21st of 2026. Then you can contact Christine Pineda at 301-415-6789, or email her at Christine, CHRISTIN.Pineda, PINEDA at NRC.gov. You can also send questions to Bridget Curran, and her phone number is 301-415-1003, and her email address is bridget.curran@nrc.gov. The fifth document that we're looking at is the request for information on domestic reuse and repurposing of the Savannah River site heavy water inventory. Heavy water is a unique type of water that is used in insulation from radioactivity, and of course the Savannah River site is a site that has a lot of nuclear work being done at it, or has been done at it. This is by the Office of Environmental Management of the Department of Energy, and its Federal Register number is 91 FR 45799-45801. This again, responses are due on September 21st of 2026, and you would contact Rosa Elmedi. Her phone number is 202-586-7652, or you can email at heavywaterfi, so that's spelled HEAVYWATERRFI, so that's Heavy Water Request for Information, the acronym, at DOE.gov. You can also submit responses to the same email address with the subject line EM heavy water RFI collaboration response. The last document that we're covering is from the Bureau of Reclamation and the Department of Interior. It's a public meeting that's going to be announced regarding the Glen Canyon Dam Adaptive Management Work Group. Its number is 91 FR 45827, and this meeting will take place August 12th of 2026 at 9:30 a.m. to 5 o'clock p.m. Mountain Daylight Time, and August 13th, 2026 from 8:30 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time in Flagstaff, Arizona, and virtually. So you'll be able to get on the web and see it, or probably some type of, they don't tell how. You can contact William Stewart at 385-622-2179 for further information, and his email address is wstewart@usbr.gov. So, in brief, these 6 notices are best reviewed together as a snapshot of the federal government review and infrastructure governance system as it's taking place. They are not all deregulatory in the same way. Some open or streamline review pathways. Some request comments, and one announces a public advisory meeting, and one recognizes fish stock recovery under the Magnuson-Stevens Act. The unifying, it's weird that I don't remember how to pronounce that. I haven't taught fisheries in a while, and it just escapes me. I need to go look it up. The unifying thread is that the federal agencies are deciding how to balance environmental review, infrastructure capacity, energy and material security, fisheries recovery, public participation, and long-term ecological management. The Tennessee Gas Pipeline Notice begins NEPA scoping for the purpose of the South Texas Enhancement Project in Brooks and Nueces County of Texas. The project would add pipeline metering, compression, and associated facilities to reallocate and create about 319,000 decatherms per day of natural gas transportation capacity toward the Aguila Dulce area. Net impact of this is an early but important procedural step that will define the environmental issues that the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission studies before deciding whether the project is required by public convenience and necessity. The FERC Categorical Exclusions Notice adopts 2 Tennessee Valley Authority categorical exclusions for recreation sites and public use areas at water power projects. The net impact of these is this can accelerate approval of categories of hydropower related recreation and public use actions that FERC expects normally will not significantly affect human environment. But it also narrows when an environmental assessment or an environmental impact statement is prepared. The categorical exclusions are issued all the time, and they usually make sense. Okay, I have the NOAA National Marine Fisheries Service Amendment 38 notice is a fisheries recovery and management flexibility item. Amendment 38 would revise the Pacific Coast groundfish fishery management plan to reflect the yellow eye rockfish and the California stock of the quail-back rockfish to be rebuilt, removing references to their building plans. The net impact is that it signals success of prior rebuilding restrictions, but also begins the shift from recovery-focused management to post-rebuilding harvest and monitoring management. The NRC DISA Technologies Notice issues an environmental assessment and FONSI, finding of no significant impact, for a proposed license amendment allowing DISA to use solid FLOPAM, FLOPAM, which is an acronym, and anionic polyacrylamide flocculant. in the high-pressure slurry ablation treatment of abandoned uranium mine waste. Flocculant is something that floats in the water and stuff binds to it. Okay, where was that? The net impact of this is that the NRC finds no significant environmental impact at the generic level, but the technology still requires careful site-specific oversight because it involves uranium, thorium-bearing waste, processed water, chemical flocculants, and potentially shallow groundwater settings. The Department of Energy Savannah River Site Heavy Water RFI request for information seeks industry and stakeholder input on beneficial reuse of roughly 530,000 gallons of heavy water stored at the Savannah River site. The inventory was previously used as a moderator in the tritium-plutonium production reactors and may contain varying levels of contaminants, tritium, and deuterium, I just lost my place, and deuterium enrichment. The net impact of this is the request for information could convert a legacy nuclear material management liability into a strategic resource for domestic isotope research, medical, industrial, and possibly reactor uses, but it also raises issues about tritium separation, waste management, on-site facility development, and long-term stewardship. The Glen Canyon Dam Adaptive Management Work Group notice announces the public meeting on hydrology water year 2026 operations, experimental flows, threatened and endangered species, long-term funding, and the 2027 budget recommendations. The net impact of this is that it is a procedural notice, but the subject matter is highly consequential because Glen Canyon Dam operations affect the Colorado River water supply, hydropower, sediment transport, Grand Canyon resources, tribal interest, recreation, and native fish recovery. How do these items change previous policy or practice? Well, it varies. The 6 notices change policy in different ways. The most direct change is the Federal Energy is FERC adoption of the TVA categorical exclusions. A categorical exclusion is not a permit by itself. It is a NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act, review category for actions that normally do not require preparation of an environmental assessment or environmental impact statement. FERC states that it adopted 2 TVA categorical exclusions under NEPA Section 109, and that the adopted categories relate to development and recreation sites and public use areas of water power projects. This reflects a broader 2026 federal pattern of using categorical exclusions to reduce procedural time for actions agencies believe usually do not produce significant environmental effects. Which is what they're for, okay? If I'm going to put up a couple of swing sets near a campground, I shouldn't have to go through the environmental impact assessment, and even though I might be cutting some grass out or something. I'm making a very extremely benign example there, but it just gives you an idea of what they're doing with these usually. However, they are misused, and they're misused frequently by different administrations. The Tennessee Gas Pipeline Notice does not approve the pipeline project, but it changes the project from an application into the active scoping proceeding. This matters because scoping sets the boundaries of the environmental document. FERC identifies the resource areas to be examined: geology and soils, water resources and wetlands, vegetation and wildlife, threatened and endangered species, cultural resources, land use, air quality and noise, reliability and safety, and socioeconomics. When they go through the environmental assessment project, this is not just about wildlife. It's from everything from can you get to your church or grocery store to is a bald eagle going to be knocked out in the process. So there's a lot of things that are here. Are your roads going to be, is the traffic on your roads going to change? Is there a better place to put it? They're supposed to provide multiple alternatives, and those alternatives often, if not usually, end up finding a better alternative than what the original action was. This notice also tells prior commenters a major part of what this environmental assessment project does is to protect private property rights so that your private property is not run over by the rich and powerful who just happen to be able to spend enough money and outspend you if they do something that is affecting your life. The notice also tells prior commenters that comments submitted before the docket opened on June 5th, 2026 must be refiled in docket number CP 26-540-000. Those are zeros, not O's, to ensure consideration. Amendment 38 would change the Pacific Coast groundfish federal management plan from a rebuilding posture to a post-rebuilding posture for the two rockfish stocks. Yellow-eye rockfish was declared overfished in 2002 and was updated from overfished to rebuilt on May 19th, 2026. The California stock or quillback rockfish was declared overfished in 2023 but was updated from overfished to rebuilt by September 16, 2025, after a benchmark assessment revised managers' understanding of stock status. That means that they thought it was worse than it was. They went in, they investigated, and determined that, this isn't as bad as we thought. We can change the designation. It's called changing your mind with new information. That would be my assumption. Of course, it's sometimes administrations have different values and different procedures and may actually just consider it less important, but that's generally how that works. Removing rebuilding plan references does not automatically remove all conservation rules, but it does change the management premise from rebuilding depleted stocks to maintaining rebuilt stocks under the harvest specifications and monitoring. The NRC DISA notice changes the authorized technical approach to abandoned uranium mine waste remediation by considering a license amendment allowing the use of specific flocculant in the HIPSA process. NERC's generic environmental assessment finds that using solid FLOPAM or similar APAMs should not significantly change expected environmental impacts under the assumption in the generic and the 2025 environmental assessments. But NRC also states it will review DISA site-specific pre-mobilization notifications to determine whether additional site-specific analysis is needed. The Department of Energy's heavy water request for information does not in itself create a program, contract, or funding opportunity. Instead, it changes the Department of Energy strategy from passive storage of legacy water, heavy water, towards active exploration of reuse, repurposing, tritiation, isotope extraction, and possible on-site facility development. This is a policy relevant shift because the Department of Energy frames the inventory as a potentially domestic isotope supply chain resource rather than merely a legacy material to manage. One could argue this is superficially at least, it appears to be a good thing. Better to reuse this stuff for something else if it can be done safely. And that generally is going to save money versus go finding the stuff again. The Glen Canyon notice changes no dam operation by itself, but it continues the adaptive management governance process created under the Grand Canyon Protective Act framework. Adaptive management is one in which you go in and you're managing the resources and you're continually going back and checking the results of what you're doing and modifying what you're doing in a proactive manner so that you don't just end up with a huge environmental impact because you just kept going through business as usual. You take a step, see what happens, modify the step until you get a stable response that is the kind of response you want. It's actually one of the best approaches for natural resource management you can do because you're always being very careful to avoid causing problems for other people or the natural environment. There are some, as the Tennessee gas pipeline moves the Tennessee Gas Pipeline step moves the project into the FERC-NEPA scoping process. This requires new docketed comments by August 17th of 2026 and starts the decision pathway for possible certificate approval and eminent domain consequences under the Natural Gas Act. Eminent domain, the environmental assessment process through NEPA, specifically a major part of it is to try to avoid eminent domain practices. Eminent domain being one in which the government takes your property. It also mandates that it also protects the property owner if they do become subject to eminent domain by ensuring that you at least get some form of just compensation for the property that was taken. Prior to that, I mean, if you've seen the movie with Clooney in which, where Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, you see that their house is underwater. That's because it was all eminent domain. This is prior to the environmental laws and policies that were placed in the 1970s. And back then they just said, get out of your house, we're flooding it. Bye. Find yourself a new home. You lost all the money you invested in it. That's exactly how it worked. And a lot of times these things were based on some rich, powerful person just going in and influencing the right person. Today, that's because of the environmental assessment project. It's much more difficult. The assessment project. It's much more difficult to do that, and it's a major role of the Environmental Protection Agency, and one of the major reasons that a lot of agencies and corporations don't really appreciate the EPA because they prevent them from just willy-nilly putting out eminent domain requests. The FERC TVA categorical exclusions, those speed up hydropower-related recreation and public use categories by allowing FERC to rely on adopted TVA exclusions that are already present. This is effective August 17th of 2026, of course. The NOAA Groundfish Amendment 38 moves yellow eye rockfish and California quillback rockfish out of the rebuilding plan status because the National Marine Fisheries Service believes their populations are rebuilt and just need management. The DISA technologies, notice, it allows environmental review of the FLOPAM use in the uranium waste remediation to proceed under a generic environmental assessment in FONSI with the site-specific follow-up review when DISA submits the site information. The Department of Energy SRS heavy water, Savannah River heavy water request, it opens a policy pathway for private or research sector reuse of legacy nuclear material inventory rather than just keeping it stored in a place. Finding it a purpose. And actually, it might be creating a market for this stuff. So it's not necessarily, that's actually maybe a very good thing. You really got to look more into it to be sure. And you might want to check out that notice. The Glen Canyon notice, it continues public adaptive management, which is usually very effective, of dam operations affecting downstream Grand Canyon resources and threatened endangered species. The rationale for these actions, this is a general rationale across the group. It's basically pragmatic management is the rationale. Build and improve infrastructure where agencies believe demand exists. Streamline review where agencies believe categories of action normally lack significant environmental effects. Recognize conservation success where fisheries assessments support it. And use technology to remediate contaminated mine waste. Repurpose valuable legacy nuclear materials. And maintain adaptive governance of the Colorado River system. FERC's rationale for the Tennessee gas pipeline scoping process is procedural and statutory. Okay, it must determine whether the project is in the public convenience and necessity, and it uses the NEPA document to do this. FERC's rationale for adopting the Tennessee Valley Authority categorical exclusions is administrative efficiency. FERC's July 2026 press release states that the Commission unanimously approved the measures to simplify the NEPA review procedure for hydropower-related actions with minimal environmental impact. The rationale is that the categorical exclusions that allow an agency to satisfy NEPA for categories of actions that normally do not significantly affect the environment, saving agency and applicant time for low-risk actions. NOAA's rationale for the Amendment 38 is statutory management cycle under the Magnuson-Stevens Act. If stock assessments and scientific reviews show the stock is rebuilt, the fishery management plan should no longer list it as rebuilding. I mean, that's common sense. This is important because fisheries law depends on feedback from stock assessments, harvest controls, and rebuilding plans. When rebuilding works, as it apparently has here, the policy should recognize the success while maintaining guardrails against renewed depletion. NRC's rationale for the DISA license amendment is that the solid APAM flocculant can improve separation of solids from the processed water during the HIPSA treatment of abandoned uranium mine waste. NRC concludes at the general level that the amendment should not significantly affect the environment if site conditions match the environmental assessment assumptions, and if DISA uses the specified solid APAM-style flocculant. The rationale is therefore technical, improved remediation efficiency while maintaining radiological and chemical controls. The Department of Energy's rationale for heavy water request for information is a strategic stewardship. The Department of Energy says that the Savannah River site inventory may support domestic, scientific, medical, industrial, isotope, deuterium, reactor coolant, and neutron moderation needs. Department of Energy also states that it does not have a dedicated tritium detritiation facility, and is soliciting information from organized and technical capacity to process, purify, detritiate, reuse, and repurpose heavy water. Reclamation's rationale for the Glen Canyon meeting is a process in the adaptive management. Because dam operations cannot be optimized for all values simultaneously, water storage, hydropower, sediment, cultural resources, recreation, native fish, and endangered species, the program uses regular public advisory meetings to bring science and stakeholders into the operations and budget recommendations. There were not notice-specific statements by named politicians for every individual item in this group. That shouldn't be a surprise because most of our politicians are going into an election year and they aren't paying attention to what the Federal Register is publishing, apparently. And why would they do oversight when they are busy trying to get themselves votes and grandstand and things of that nature? It's basically, I don't need to tell anybody what's going on. It's incumbent upon the legislative branch to provide oversight for Federal Register actions, and they should be looking at this stuff, and I'm sure some are, if not most. But certainly they're not voicing opinions one way or the other, which could be helpful or harmful to the intent of the executive branch. And I'm not saying that whether those things are good or bad. It's just that it's appropriate. They should be commenting on these things, but I could find nothing. The strongest named political divide concerns NEPA streamlining and energy infrastructure permitting, which affects the FERC categorical exclusion and the pipeline notices most directly. For fisheries recovery, uranium mine remediation, heavy water reuse, and Glen Cabin adaptive management, political reactions are more issue area based than notice specific. Republican viewpoints generally support faster permitting, categorical exclusions, energy infrastructure, domestic supply chains, and reduced procedural delay. House Natural Resources Chairman Bruce Westerman praised the 2026 NEPA reforms as returning common sense to the federal permitting, clarifying the scope of review, and helping America build infrastructure and develop natural resources. The Council on Environmental Equality Chair, Catherine Scarrett, similarly framed categorical exclusion guidance as an off-ramp from unnecessary levels of review where appropriate. These views support the FERC categorical exclusion notice and the broader pipeline infrastructure posture. Democratic viewpoints are more divided than the simple pro-anti permitting split. Many Democrats do support faster permitting for clean energy transmission, water, and climate resilience infrastructure, but they tend to oppose streamlining that weakens public participation, climate analysis, environmental justice, and community safeguard. Herein is probably the difference between the two. Simply, they are much more concerned that we expedite things within the framework of ensuring they still operate properly. Whereas the other side is more interested in just expediting unless we have some rationale, a priori, that we actually have a reason to believe, and a very serious reason, and if we're not aware of anything, just go on and do it. Okay, so those are kind of the two extremes, and a lot of these politicians do fall in between, as do most people. Reuters reported in March 2026 that Senators Sheldon Whitehouse and Martin Heinrich were ready to resume permitting reform talks, showing that Democrats are not uniformly opposed to reform. And I'd say they are almost uniformly not opposed to reform, as they want the reform to still be effective. And some people in the House and Senate do not want them to be effective. They would just assume they were gone. So, I mean, it is important to recognize that, and I'm not picking on anyone. That is their values. However, Democratic criticisms usually emphasize that NEPA is one of the main tools communities have to identify alternatives, reduce harm, and make federal agencies disclose environmental consequences. NEPA protects everyday people. That's what it does. When I teach my class, one of the things I'll tell students if they're not quite getting is I'll say, just look at it this way. NEPA's purpose is don't shit on the little guy. That's what it is. Just because you're someone who's powerless and doesn't have a lot of money backing you doesn't mean that you're not important. And NEPA protects you from others taking your property. That's what it means when it says takes. When it says reducing harm to your personal property, the land you live on, your laundry hanging in the backyard, the water you drink, all these things, you should be confident that someone isn't destroying them while your back is turned, and that's what NEPA process is for. It also protects the big corporations protects their property rights as well. Environmental law in general is property right law. That's what it is. It comes out of property right law from the areas of nuisance and the areas of trespass. Everybody understands what trespass is. Everybody understands what a public nuisance is. And environmental law falls under those two areas of torts. At the notice-specific level, likely Republican arguments would emphasize natural gas reliability in South Texas, efficient hydropower project review, post-recovery fisheries flexibility, nuclear material reuse, and dam operation pragmatism. Likely Democratic environmental arguments would emphasize methane and compression emissions, landowner rights, cumulative impacts, environmental justice. Remember, environmental justice, all that is environmental justice as a term is protect everyday people from the rich and powerful. That's what it does. It's the justice is that you are treated fairly by the law, not that you are treated in light of how much you're worth in dollar value or how many privileges you can buy. That's what environmental justice does for whatever issue. Are some of our issues of bigotry, where people suppress other groups due to religion or race or whatever, sure, that's in there too. But the overriding thing is protecting people from the rich and powerful. That's what it does. Moving on, the Democratic arguments also are going to emphasize the need for public comment, careful radioactive waste oversight, and ecosystem flow needs, and as well as addressing climate change stressors in both the marine and the Colorado River systems. From a scholarly and technical background, the information cuts both ways. On one side, environmental review literature supports public participation as substantially meaningful rather than merely procedural. A recent USGS published study found that when the federal agencies changed project alternatives in the environmental review process, they credited public comments as the reason in most of those cases. When they ask for these, they read every single comment. And I'm going to guarantee you, I'm not sure that your representatives read every single comment you send in. There is very little that is more productive than submitting comments in an environmental assessment process or to a Federal Register notice. Because when comments go into these, they are required to read every one. Legislators aren't required to read anything. Okay? Maybe they should be, but they aren't. Let's get back. That's so this supports taking scoping notices seriously. So we've got the scoping notices, and they need to be taken seriously, especially for pipeline routes, compressor stations, hydropower recreation facilities, uranium waste remediation operations, and the Colorado River flow decisions. On the other side, infrastructure policy scholarship and recent federal policy emphasize that the environmental review can become slow, repetitive, poorly targeted when agencies spend years preparing documents that do not improve decisions. It's important to recognize that there's a certain amount of manpower that is minimally required in order to do these jobs. If we take something like, I'm going to step out of the environmental arena and look at, if you think about insurance and Social Security Administration, these two industries, one being a government agency and one being a for-profit agency, are very similar. And of course there are insurance agencies that are not for profit as well. But just looking at these two extremes, when you have a government agency, we expect that it's going to do an outstanding job at everything it does. We spend the money necessary to get the job done. We spend the money necessary to make sure things are safe. And in the case of the Social Security Administration, we expect that money is being spent and allocated efficiently and effectively so that the product that it's supposed to be delivering is delivered. However, if we think about the main expense in these things is usually human resources beyond the investment by putting money into an account, for example. If we consider human resources are the major expense, let's look at it. We have insurance companies, take a State Farm or an Allstate or places like that. They spend, they have to operate at super efficiency. And the reason is that a business, when it is running, money has to be removed from it for profit, going to stockholders, right? If we have State Farm, you can own stock, and you get the extra money goes into stock. When we have something like the Social Security Administration, that money goes back into running the program or something else in the government to improve things. There usually aren't surpluses in the government. It usually is break even. Whereas in these other agencies, they do. So if we consider that when we look at efficiency isn't the primary goal, the product is the primary goal. in a government agency and as well as technically in a nonprofit, because that product has to come out right. So we may spend more money to get it right. In a business, a corporation, getting it right is important, but they have to be able to remain profitable, and that is always more important. So they can cut. Think about hamburgers. We can't make enough money, so put more fat into the burger, or maybe reduce the amount in that bag so that you have fewer Fritos or whatever the world you're eating. You can't do that in a government agency. So if we take and compare an insurance company, most of them have a ratio of about 1,500 to 1,800, maybe 2,000 customers per employee served. If we take the Social Security Administration, and remember that if you are a company like State Farm, they don't hire janitors or secretaries. Most of these people are outsourced. So they're not employees, they're contractors. In the federal government, there are civil service employees who are janitors and so forth. So they create a situation where we've actually got more employees should be more employees, right? Because not only do you have the people who work on the benefits and do the accounting, you've also got people who are cleaning up the mess on the floor and washing the windows. Well, if we compare these two, 15 to 2,000 customers per employee for a business that runs insurance, any of the big ones, Allstate, State Farm, I'm just using them as examples, okay? Their ratio, based on the best available data I can find, is that they're at 1,800 to 2,000 customers per employee. That's what they serve. That's what they consider to be the most efficient. You ever wonder why government agencies maybe aren't keeping up with the speed they need to be at and giving the impression that they aren't efficient and that they aren't doing the job? Well, the Social Security Administration is somewhere around 30 or 40,000 customers per employee, and that's only counting the ones that are currently collecting. That's a huge difference. You need to have enough people available to do the job, because we expect that safety net to be there, period. We recognize that a company can go bankrupt and we lost what we had, whether it's a bank or an insurance company. That's why Social Security is so important, right? Well, the same thing's true of the environmental agencies, and I haven't looked up these numbers, but the same kind of, every time I do look up the numbers, the actual customers per employee served is far higher in private sector, only because we've let everybody go and keep cutting and cutting and cutting. And then suddenly people think that everything's just crappy. Well, it's actually that you've removed all the workers and nobody's doing the job. I mean, people can say whatever they want, but 40,000 customers per employee at the Social Security Administration is nowhere close to 1,800 at State Farm or Allstate or whatever company you want to pick. Okay? For fisheries, the Pacific Coast Groundfish Notice is an example of adaptive resource management working through stock assessments, rebuilding plans, and harvest controls. Rebuilt status of yellow eye rockfish and California quillback rockfish suggests that restrictions and monitoring can succeed. The ecological caution is that these are long-lived fishes, often slow-growing and vulnerable to overharvest and habitat disturbance. Post-rebuilding management cannot treat recovery as permanent because it would be very easy for them to slide backwards, back to a rebuilding status or worse. For uranium waste remediation, the DISA notice sits with a technical trade-off. Abandoned uranium mine waste is itself a persistent environmental and public health problem, and remediation technologies can reduce risk. But any technology that mobilizes, separates, concentrates, or chemically treats uranium and thorium-bearing material also requires careful control of processed water, residues, worker exposure, groundwater interaction, and waste disposal. The NRC's approach, generic environmental assessment, plus site-specific review, is defensible only if site-specific screening remains rigorous. If they just blow it off, well, it's not going to work. It's going to cause people to be exposed, or the environment, or it end up in drinking water or something else. It has to. This is a serious thing to be that has to be monitored and have a lot of oversight. For the Savannah River heavy water situation, the technical background includes tritium supply, deuterium value, nuclear legacy stewardship, isotope supply chain resilience, and waste management. Heavy water can be a valuable research and industrial material, but tritium-contaminated heavy water raises handling, detritiation, and waste stream and public trust issues. Nobody wants that going down their highway. I'm here in Oklahoma, which is a very red state, and of course, right on the sides of the road, there are signs talking, we don't want nuclear waste going down the road here. Well, you want nuclear power, but you don't want to have to deal with nuclear waste. It's the old NIMBY thing. Shove it in someone else's backyard, right? Not in my backyard. For the Savannah, for the Glen Canyon Dam, adaptive management is essential because the Colorado River system is no longer stationary. Drought, warming, low reservoir levels, hydropower needs, sediment limitation, and non-native species, tribal resources, and native fish recovery all interact. The AMWG agenda's attention to water year operations, experiments, threatened and endangered species, long-term funding, and budget recommendations is therefore not routine meeting filler. It is how the system negotiates ecological and social trade-offs in the Glen Canyon system. The South Texas Pipeline Corridor, the most affected communities and resources are landowners, nearby residents, water wetland systems, wildlife habitat, cultural resources, and communities near the proposed compressor stations and pipeline loop. The project is small in route mileage but large in capacity, and compressor station air noise impacts may be more important than the 1.5 mile loop itself. These things make noise, and people in those areas are grandfathered in, and they start making a whole ton of noise. People are going to be upset, keep you up at night, or disrupt other things. That's just for the communities. Okay, hydropower. The FERC TVA categorical exclusions will matter most for recreation site development and public use actions at water power projects. These may often be low-impact improvements, but recreation access can still affect shorelines, riparian zones, visitor pressure, erosion, cultural sites, and local traffic. You got to remember that it's not just, as my really bizarre example of putting in swing sets, it's not just about the action of putting them in, but what is the sustained effect of those swing sets being there going to be? Anybody who's in the backyard and put up a swing set where the kids are at, you know that there's going to be paths that get worn out going to the swing set, that the kids are going to be in those areas. I'm just picking on a swing set, but every time you put in a thing, there is the sustained impact of human use over time, and it's even people at the campgrounds now littering in that area where they had not maybe gone before. So it's not as simple as, they're putting up some swing sets. And of course, I'm not saying this is swing sets. I'm just using that as a very simple example for understanding. The rockfish situation, these are named ecological beneficiaries of rebuilding, Commercial and recreational fishing communities may benefit from less restrictive post-building management, but conservation depends on harvest limits, bycatch controls, habitat protections, and continued stock assessments. So it's not like they're out of the woods yet. When we look at the DISA notice involving the uranium mining sites, the DISA notice matters most for abandoned uranium mine sites and communities affected by legacy uranium contamination. It could improve remediation efficiency, but uranium mining legacies have often been borne by rural, indigenous, and downwind downstream communities. This makes trust monitoring and site-specific analysis essential. When we talk about the Savannah River heavy water request for information, it mostly directs potential industrial partners, isotope users, medical and research users, and the Department of Energy waste management programs. The environmental system includes stored heavy water tritium-bearing material, detritiation facilities, waste streams, and any new on-site facilities. In the case of Glen Canyon, the notice affects the Colorado River below the Glen Canyon Dam, Glen Canyon resources, native fish such as the humpback chub, hydropower, recreation, tribal interests, sediment resources, and basin water management. Its impact is procedural, but potentially consequential because recommendations help shape operations and experiments. The relevance to the overall socio-ecological system is that we have an integrated ecological system theme, and that is that the infrastructure decisions do not merely move energy, water, fish, or materials. They reorganize relationships among agencies in a huge network. It reorganizes these relationships in this enormous, complicated network of agencies, industries, communities, ecosystems, and future risks. The pipeline notice connects gas markets to private lands, wetland, wildlife impacts, air and noise exposure, eminent domain risk, and fossil energy dependence. The categorical exclusion notice changes the screening threshold for hydropower-related recreation and public use actions, and the groundfish notice converts ecological recovery into a management flexibility. The NRC and DOE notices convert nuclear legacy materials into technological and supply chain opportunities, and the Glen Canyon meeting embeds dam operations in the large adaptive management network. The common governance challenge is deciding when speed, flexibility, reuse are legitimate improvements and when they become shortcuts around environmental accountability. A healthy socio-ecological system needs both the ability to act and build and the institutional discipline to evaluate cumulative effects, affected communities, ecological thresholds, and long-term uncertainty. Within this system, the biodiversity and habitat concerns are going to be mixed. Pipeline and hydropower actions may create local risk. Groundfish rebuilding is positive. The Glen Canyon management can strongly affect native fish and riparian resources. With water resources, there's a high relevance. Pipeline construction, uranium waste remediation, heavy water handling, and Glen Canyon operations all involve water resource risk or management. Energy and infrastructure concerns are generally supportive of additional capacity, faster low-risk review, and nuclear material reuse. Risks include fossil lock-in and procedural thinning. Public participation is strongly important for scoping comments, requests for information responses, and AMWG meetings are the main public hooks. Categorical exclusions reduce later project level review in some cases. Environmental justice is potentially significant where landowners, rural communities, indigenous communities, or uranium legacy communities bear localized risks. Regulatory efficiency will probably be positive if streamlining avoids unnecessary paperwork without masking significant impacts. Negative it'll be negative if it erodes site-specific review or cumulative impact analysis in such a way that they actually are just ignoring what's going to happen and going ahead with things. From a long-term governance perspective, these notices show adaptive governance across sectors: fisheries, dams, pipeline certificates, nuclear cleanup, and NEPA categories. The stability of decisions depends on the monitoring and credible public records. Overall, this group of notices is not as ideologically uniform as the ESA harm clusters were. It is better understood as a practical governance bundle. Federal agencies are trying to permit energy infrastructure, streamline review for low-impact hydropower actions, and recognize fisheries recovery, authorize a remediation process amendment, and repurpose a legacy nuclear inventory, as well as continue Colorado River adaptive management, which is actually very environmentally friendly. When we look at this, these are all environmentally friendly procedures and processes if done in the proper manner. Some of this is sensible, some need scrutiny, and some could become risky if procedural shortcuts replace substantive analysis. The most review-worthy item environmentally is the Tennessee gas pipeline scoping notice, because it is the earliest public opportunity to shape the environmental record for the project that could affect landowners, air noise, wetlands, species, cultural resources, safety, and socioeconomics. The most important procedural item is FERC's adoption of the TVA categorical exclusions, because it reflects a broader national shift towards faster NEPA review. The most positive conservation story is the ground fish rebuilding notice, provided that the managers maintain post-recovery safeguards. And the most technically sensitive item is DISA's uranium waste flocculant amendment and DOE's heavy water reuse request for information. The most socio-ecologically complex item is the Glen Canyon Dam meeting, because it sits on the center of water power, endangered species, sediment, tribal interests, and climate-stressed river governance. So, if any of these notices are of special concern to you, then you should really get to the Federal Register, read them in more detail, as I'm just doing it in bulk to try to get through a bunch of them, and contact the people who are concerned, because they don't want more work to do, of course, but they do want your feedback, because it's important in order for them to do their job and for these outcomes to represent what the people need. Okay, so have a very nice day, and that's it for today.